Yeah, thank you very much, Amanda. And while my panelists take a seat, I'll just give you a short introduction. So good morning also from my side. Please, Sophia. As we already heard, cooperation across borders is a key feature of the European university landscape already for a while, and it takes many different forms, from bilateral collaboration on student mobility, small-scale collaboration projects, peer-to-peer research collaboration, to large-scale multilateral alliances like we have them in the European Universities Initiative. And transnational collaboration is also a big focus of European-level policies, traditionally in the Bologna Process, but also in the EU, not least since the emergence of the alliances in the past years. More than 340 universities are enthusiastically engaged in the European Universities Initiative and in the alliances so far, and also policymakers have put high hopes on the alliances, wishing them to use them as test beds for all kinds of different things. At the same time, there are, of course, challenges to transnational cooperation that come to the surface in this multilateral setting. And today we will also be discussing a little bit whether this metaphor that was used very often at the beginning, especially by the Commission, about the quantum leap in transnational collaboration, whether after 3 years into this, it's really been the quantum leap so far. And of course, also what all these other types of smaller scale collaboration are there for. So we are here today to really go a little bit back in this first panel to the fundamentals of transnational collaboration. As Amanda has said at the beginning, this is a time of increased change, and a lot of is happening around the universities that impacts us, and also the collaboration in higher education and research. So we want to take time in this first hour to talk a little bit about the purpose. What is actually the purpose? We've heard this already from some of our EUA members in the videos, and I would like to start also with that first question. But first, I will let you know who's sitting here with me. So I start with Sophia Eriksson-Waterschoot, Director for Youth Education and Erasmus Plus at the Directorate General for Education and Culture at the European Commission. Michael Murphy, President of the European University Association and former President of University College Cork in Ireland. Matteo, Vespa, President of the European Students' Union. And Kathleen O'Connor, Vice President for International and European Networks at the University of Lille in France. So thank you very much for being with us here today in Brussels. We're really glad you could all come and we can have you here live and in person. I would like to start this first round and ask you all for a first short introduction, reflection. What is the purpose of transnational collaboration of universities from your perspective? Kathleen, if you want to start with that.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation, Anna-Lena and the EUA. So it's a pleasure to be here. I just want to give a little bit of context. So I'm from the University of Lille, which is not far from here, actually, in northern France. And I think it's important to understand to understand my perspective, to understand the University of Lille's context, which is a large public university of 80,000 students that was created in 2018 from the merger of 3 smaller universities. So it's a new university, but an old university. And because we had 3 separate universities that merged, we also had 3 separate international strategies that came together, and all of the partnerships and all of this. And so these ideas of deepening and widening are very relevant to us, because we're trying we're still, even now, 4 years later, still working on how we want to go forward. Which of the partnerships do we keep? Which of the partnerships do we maybe let go, and how we want to structure our international partnerships in the future. We've also just recently joined in the sort of expansion of the second wave of European university alliances. We've recently joined an existing alliance, which is Neurotech EU. So that has just added maybe to our complexity a little bit in how we go forward on our international strategy. The answer to the question, I wish I could say something that wasn't already said in the video. The video really covered everything. So researchers who are looking for expertise and going after additional funding, students who are looking for maybe a line on a CV, also outside expertise, language skills, intercultural communication, and maybe just to have fun. No one mentioned that, but I think students also think of this as something fun to do, is to go abroad. Universities, of course, are looking for the skills and expertise and the leverage for funding, and also to raise their profile. I think that was already said as well, to attract better talent, better researchers, more students. And then I think somebody from Ghent in the video mentioned this idea of serving your local region. So we're in a city, in a metropolitan area, and in a region, and we see ourselves also at the service of the region and its people, and we want to work with our region and improve the lives of the citizens. And so I think that's something that's important for us too. So I think mostly everything was covered in the video, but it's good to see we're all on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you already talked a bit about the students, and it's also about having fun. So I would really like to ask Matteo to also let us know what you think is the purpose of transnational collaboration.
Yes, the element of having fun, we call it like also like the non-formal and informal element of the let's say exchange experiences. For instance, that cannot be substituted by any formal of virtual exchange of what is called virtual mobility. So I'm glad that actually it has been indicated, because sometimes we are in the discussions that virtual mobility or parts of blended mobility can be put at the same level as physical mobility. They cannot for this particular element, which is exactly the element of let's say the personal exchange and the personal growth in developing in growing in a multicultural environment. How it is normally the exchange experiences. I would like to draw a distinction between international and transnational cooperation. Of course, when we when we talk about civil society or universities, normally we talk about transnational elements. But I think that for what regards higher education, there is a difference between international and transnational in the depth of the collaboration. In general, collaboration beyond borders is important for higher education to fulfill the different missions in education, research, and in societal engagement, and working across border. Also, it's also important to foster the international perspective for universities and also for the students in terms of possibilities and of opportunities. But the difference between international and transnational, I would say, as I was saying, is the element of the depth. In the sense that when we talk to transnationally, we are talking about not just looking at the countries, but we're talking about looking at the different local environments where the higher education institutions operate, and the relevance that the collaboration can have to the communities that they serve. But it's also an element of working towards common missions and working also towards common governance. Now, when we're talking about the European universities, even if we should not forget of all the other universities that are not part of an alliance, that are actually the majority, we are talking about that kind of level of cooperation, at least as intended. But then there are a whole set of questions that rise, because, for example, the governance or the alliances would not say pass the test of many national authorities if they were national structure for what regards student involvement or for what regards other elements. So it is important that if we keep the transnational perspective, we also still have in mind what have been the historic achievements in the different national contexts for what regards the advancement in higher education, and be ready to replicate it also at the European level.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And we'll come to Michael, from your perspective of a former university president, but also EUA president. What is your take on that, the purpose of transnational collaboration?
Well, you can see, of course, that the answer you will get will depend on where you sit in the education biosphere, from a student to a researcher to an academic to a university leader. Policymakers on my right, I won't answer the question for you, Sophia, but perhaps a different perspective. We wrote a document last year, we published a document last year on behalf of the European university sector, and it was called Universities Without Walls, how we should organize ourselves and how we should act in the next 15 years. And in it we said that the primary objective of our sector is to enable society to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. That's the key purpose. The sustainability of the planet, the sustainability of the species, the biosphere, and whatever. And we said that this requires collective action among the university sector and all our external stakeholders. So if you're asking me what our primary purpose should be, it's to optimize the collective capacity of the entire global learning and research community to position us to sustain the planet ourselves. And what's happening here is a mechanism to try to bind the institutions to maximize that collective capacity at a global level in the end. But we're focused at the moment on taking all the steps that we can to make European universities make the biggest contribution that they can to the bigger picture. So this is positioning Europe to play its part in the global agenda. That's how I would look at it, beyond the individual expectations of individual actors.
Yeah, you already reflected a little bit on the bigger picture and indeed connected it also to some of the policy goals that we may know from the European discussions. So with that, it's a good transition to Sophia to ask you, what do you think from the perspective of the European Commission is the purpose?
Well, thank you so much. I just want to thank you, all, the EUA, for having organized this seminar with this theme, because it really proves the added value of what we are all doing. Indeed, we are cooperating as we speak, as being here. So it's so nice to put the spotlight really on and try to dig a bit deeper into this particular way of working. Now, cooperation, I would say, if we look at the European higher education landscape today, it is extremely diverse. But at the same time, we have this long tradition of cooperation. And I think these two elements are really the core of what we're discussing today. And I like what I've heard. I liked the videos, what you've heard. So there's no need to repeat sort of where do we want to go? Where do we see the added value of actually cooperating together? Yes, we know we will advance knowledge, we will have excellent education, excellent research, we will have more inclusive institutions. We are finding new innovative ways of working together. I mean, the list can be long. We want to have mobility of staff, mobility of students. So I think the kind of the objectives have been set, but what we are really we should not forget is this diversity. And I think that's been the added value of all the cooperation models. And I totally agree with Matteo. We have to look at the different types of cooperation models. Sometimes the attention gets too focused perhaps on the European University Alliances. They are really flagships, and we see these alliances can in a way be inspiration for many others, but we have different steps of increasing and cooperating. And there we see the bottom-up way of doing this, the diversity really coming into play also at European level. I think this in the end is the purpose. And we know that because of the diversity, we will find different solutions, but hopefully in the end, by based on our common ground, based on our common values and our common challenges, because we have big challenges today, be it the green or digital transitions, being kind of finding a way forward after the pandemic. But what I really, my main point is also to say that the fact that we have this diversity and we had these challenges that happened and are in front of us, we see in very concrete ways how alliances or the more, let's say, easier or simpler cooperation models, they were up to it. They managed to come up with new solutions during the pandemic. We've seen they have come up with different online solutions. We've seen how they are mobilized now to support people coming from Ukraine, etc. So we see it works, and I think that's in the end the purpose of all it all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. It actually shows that we're all not so very far when it comes to the purpose. The question is, of course, how you then can realize that on the ground. And I would like to come back to you, Kathleen, for this. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you actually work on the ground with your partners, be it in the alliance you newly joined or in other projects, just to give a couple of examples?
Sure, thank you very much. So we use, obviously, a lot of different instruments. Some of them are, most of them, of course, are from Europe. So mobility, Erasmus. We have 10 Erasmus Mundus joint master's degrees, co-tutel, so joint doctoral theses. So it's nothing that's particularly new or original. So most universities use these instruments in Europe, but it's essential. So I think that's really important, and it touches a lot of different levels, which speaks to the diversity, I think, that you mentioned, that at the level of the university and the individual faculties and individual researchers. We do have some internal instruments that we've developed on our own. So we have something called an associate international laboratory, which allows 2 research groups, so one in Lille and one in a partner university, to work together on a research project. We have a very robust self-financed program of invited lecturers to try and bring in lecturers from partner universities to speak. We're looking now, so speaking of the deepening question, we're starting to put into place a series of strategic partnerships to work more intensely with certain universities. And we also have a big focus on networks. So besides the Neurotech EU University Alliance, we have a couple of our own, what I call homegrown networks. So we have a network called the 3i Network. So it's with Lille, Kent, University of Ghent, and KU Leuven here in Belgium, that focuses on our common regional challenges, because we're all we touch one another, even with Kent a little bit across the channel, and we work together on our shared regional challenges, and we have a couple of other networks as well. So we work with a lot of different tools, but one of our goals is to really to work on our deepening. As I said, we have lots of we have a wide base of partnerships because we had the 3 universities that merged, but now we're looking into the deepening and trying to get, if we're going to create new networks or have new invited speakers or that sort of thing, to get them from the same partners that we work with in other areas, so that we can try and have a deeper sort of partnership.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for this view from the ground. Sophia, I would actually like to come back to you, because you were also talking already about the policy goals and a little bit alluding to the challenges. But how do you make actually sure at the policy level or from a commission perspective that universities can fulfill all these goals, can fulfill the purpose? Isn't there a bit of a mismatch maybe between the very high ambitions, especially for the alliances and the universities initiative, and the means, be it financially or politically?
It's a very good question, and I will not be able to answer it fully. But I think I'm coming back a bit to this, the idea of diversity, and linked to that, of course, the institutional autonomy. That is a very valued and important part of how universities function and should function. So what can be done when it comes to authorities, and I'm thinking here of all levels, not only European, but national, regional, local, is of course to try to give good incentives that will make universities thrive and in the respect of full institutional autonomy. So I don't think we can have any success of good cooperation if not all of these levels cooperate and join forces, so to say, together with the higher education institutions. So clearly, from our perspective, we cannot, we can encourage, let's say, especially the local and the regional and national level to add on to this also transnational cooperation. That's one part. But then, from our perspective, we try to add value to what is already out there, what the institutions are doing, what, for example, the national financing system, the policy frameworks, what is out there. So we try to add value and perhaps suggest that sometimes things can be aligned to better everybody's outcome. At European level, I would say we have 3 tools or 3 ways of working. Clearly from the more vision and strategic perspectives, we can try to pull together where do we see common challenges and perhaps find some inspirational solutions without telling that everybody should do the same thing. That's not the purpose. But there are clearly common challenges, and we have that advantage that we can pull this together and try to set possible ways of finding solutions. So that's where the European strategy for universities, as a recent example, comes in. Now related to this, we have luckily some really powerful funding programs and instruments, and you've already mentioned some of them, I think, in your interventions. From our perspective, also being from the education side, we have the flagship program Erasmus+, with luckily a very big never big enough, but a bigger budget than the past, where we have a lot of possibilities for cooperation, but of course coupled with all the work on the research side, Horizon Europe. But I think it's always so useful, and I want to repeat it in every moment I can, that the menu goes beyond these 2 flagships. We keep on a bit only focusing on the 2, and I see that it's perhaps because it's not enough knowledge and awareness of the other possibilities through everything from the Digital Europe program, the regional funds, the social fund, but also the Recovery and Resilience Facility, where we have a lot of focus on education. So the funding part, of course, is where we can add value. I should say, by the way, look out, just a few days ago, we launched the big annual Erasmus Plus call, more than 3 billion for education and training. It's really, I mean, the budget profile is increasing, so I think this is really worthwhile to use. Then we have the more, perhaps the policy part, and the more trying to find incentives in the framework conditions, where our recent council recommendation on building bridges for cooperation in higher education is a tool. It's a voluntary tool, and we cannot oblige anybody to do changes. But we see already that this kind of soft pressure actually has an impact, and we see some changes in national legislations that will facilitate cooperation. Can be anything from accreditation or recognition, quality assurance, and so on. So there are things happening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, you actually gave me the very good transition to the next round. You were alluding to some of the changes that are maybe coming up also with regard to national regulation. But we also know from what Amanda said at the beginning in the briefing we've actually published at EUA when we asked our National Rectors Conference about it, that there are still quite some challenges out there, be it linked to system level differences and barriers, or also at the institutional level. I would like to use this next round to talk a little bit more about that. So where do you see the major challenges actually for transnational collaboration? And there, maybe we start with a student perspective first.
Thank you. Yes, so the first element that I would like to underline is that also when we discuss within the Bologna process now with the fundamental values, there is this balance to be done between institutional autonomy and public responsibility, in the sense of what is the role of public authority towards higher education, and this is mainly 3 elements: the framework, the funding, and the monitoring also of the fulfillment the missions of the higher education, which is part of the reasons why, for instance, we have the quality assurance. But in general, it's also important as as the public authorities in any case have also the mandate to give at least the enabling framework for that. And I'm underlining that because it is very much important for the elements of the European education area, but also for the elements of policy convergence that sometimes it's needed in order for the ambitions of the European universities, for instance, to go through. An example is, for instance, in the Council recommendation on building bridges that was mentioned, the element that is underlined on the involvement of students and staff in the governance of the alliance is based on the democratic traditions of self-governance, which means democratically elected, and in that, for instance, the role is not just in the member states to ensure that, but also in the Commission, for instance, in putting that specific agreed element in the calls for the alliances and monitoring mechanisms out there. So, for what regards the challenges in the cooperation, of course there is differences in funding. So the importance also that the funding for the transnational cooperation comes also especially from the European level, also in order to avoid policy, let's say, divergence from the different purposes of the funds. There is, of course, elements in the legislation. Normally what is talked about is for the quality assurance, but there is also the issue of admission and tuition fees, which actually from a student perspective are important elements, as well as the elements of student welfare that is different in different countries. And all those elements, of course, can be tackled only, I would say, partially through the cooperation. We think that it's important that when there is an agreement, there is also a follow-up, and we have different instruments at the European level to do that, from the European semester, for instance, and also the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Now there is very much a link between the fundings for investments and the fulfillment of the country-specific recommendations, and there is the clear, let's say, the clear path towards including also tertiary education and the goals of the European strategy for universities into this kind of framework. But it is also important in to look at the broader context. The broader context, of course, is the Bologna Process, in which we are in a very interesting moment, because now we are discussing about the definition and implementation of a monitoring framework for elements that touch, we can say, the core also sovereignty of the national systems for what regards education, from social dimension to learning and teaching to the fundamental values. And we think that the role that the European Union can have in that is to provide at least the instruments within the European education area to ensure that the agreements that are taken at the Bologna level can be implemented. And for that, we think that we have all the instruments. Of course, it is important to maintain also the expansionary cycle. And in this, the discussion about the new fiscal framework, the start of the new European semester, and the discussion about the dismantlement of the general escape clause in 2024 cast a bit of clouds within this expansionary framework. But it is important in any case that all these elements go together, and that the involvement of the stakeholders and of the communities and of the students at the different level is there, because we haven't seen that too much, for instance, in the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Sometimes we are still struggling at the level of the European universities, and I think that in this element, which has been agreed by the Council, but also in general for what regards the Recovery and Resilience Facility, for instance, by the Member State, by the Parliament and the Council, the Commission has a vital role to play. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You already actually went quite far into the policy discussions, and that's of course very important. I think we will come back to that a little bit at the end, but I would like to, for the moment, to take a bit of a step back and actually look at what happens at the institutional level, and where you see from a university perspective really what are the challenges in cooperating with partners across borders. So Kathleen, you're already looking at me, and I think that's really for you, this question.
Great, thank you very much. So obviously there are a lot of challenges that come both from outside and from inside the institution. So we've seen some of these in the last few years, right? So we had the COVID pandemic that disrupted mobility and other kinds of research collaborations. It was also positive in some ways, because we also learned to work together using Zoom or other tools like this, which we didn't really use before. We always stuck with traditional mobility, and now we're starting to see a shift toward hybrid mobility, virtual mobility, which I agree you mentioned earlier is not necessarily ideal because of the intercultural aspect, but it does give that extra possibility, and for certain students might be students who wouldn't do a traditional mobility might be more interested in that kind of thing. Political differences, obviously, we've seen that this year with the war in Russia and Ukraine. All of a sudden, we had to scramble to bring our students back from Russia and have to make decisions then, of course, about what we're going to do about our partnerships with universities there and how we're going to treat them. Just in general, managing our partnerships can be difficult because of the complexity of all of the different tools. So we have all of these different tools that are essential, as I mentioned before. But so we have binational agreements and Erasmus agreements and consortium agreements and all of these different things, and we have to sort of decide among that complexity, how are we going? Which ones do we want to use strategically? Which ones are really just for mobility? How do we structure our transnational cooperation? Obviously, what Matteo mentioned too about the different systems in different countries, that also makes for challenges when putting together projects. And policy changes. So I think the European University Initiative was a really big disruptive change in how we do transnational cooperation. For the universities that managed to do an alliance in the first 2 rounds or 3 rounds now, I think, they've seen it's something good, because all of a sudden a lot of ministers and the individual countries really sat up and took notice and said, let's use this. You mentioned before that they're used as a sort of testing ground for new projects. And then the universities who weren't in those alliances really felt left behind, but they're a minority, as you mentioned too. It's only 10% will eventually be in an alliance, and so it's been quite disruptive, I think, but not necessarily in a negative way. But for some, it's been quite positive. So that's just a sort of idea of how we see some of the challenges at the university for working on our ongoing and our future cooperation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Michael, I would also like to ask you that question. What do you see as the major challenges from the university's perspective in the current framework of collaborations?
Well, it gets a bit difficult to be original as the list goes on. Just a few thoughts. They're obviously at 2 levels. They're within the university sector itself, and then they are in the external milieu. And let's add a couple of university-specific ones. First one is that the first challenge is to make sure that the strategic plans of our universities across Europe make provision for transnational cooperation, highlight it sufficiently, and they currently do not in many cases. Here's a tough one. The capacity and the competence of university leadership across Europe is not what it needs to be for this initiative to be successful. We have some very professional leaders across Europe, and we have some, and many, who rely on divine inspiration after a rectoral election. And that we've got to deal with if we're going to be successful in this initiative. And we have institutional governance challenges, and our academic governance methodologies are too inflexible, and we have a lot of work to do to adapt them to the needs of transnational cooperation. We have not been as good as we must be on recognition. I mean, God, this is 20 years into Bologna. We have work to do. Internal funding models, funding allocation models have to be adapted. We have to be more willing to redeploy our staff where we can, and we've got to make sure that our language policies and practices within the universities are supportive of the initiative. So we have a lot of work to do ourselves with help from the outside world. At governmental level, I think the challenge is that there's too much schizophrenic thinking. We haven't mentioned it yet, but the biggest objectives politically are a stronger Europe, better teaching and learning, better research, so that Europe is more competitive. We have a big picture idea that this is another vehicle for sustaining peace in Europe, for creating European identity. They're in the preambles of all the documents, the strategies, the Gothenburg communique. But when it comes to addressing the challenges that must be met for this to work, there is an absolute reluctance to cede power. Each nation wants to maintain its control of education for its political, cultural, economic purposes. That schizophrenia has to be challenged because it and our competence and capacity challenges are, to me, among the biggest obstacles.
I see Sophia already smiling and nodding because, of course, Michael, you're also alluding to the political difficulties. Indeed, the European Union has, of course, not so many competences when it comes to education to actually do something about the framework condition. We rely a lot on national governments. So, Sophia, what do you see actually as the challenge from a policy perspective?
Yes, so let's start perhaps on the bigger scale. I think inspired by what we just heard. Clearly, yes, we have big objectives of course, with all our transnational cooperation models and certainly the alliances, increasing competitiveness, attractiveness, and indeed the kind of a soft diplomacy element. I think that's really important. Of course, even if we do not have a strong EU competence, we have a strong complementary competence, and we have a strong commitment from member states. I think we should not underestimate that. With the strategy tabled by the Commission in January this year, coupled with the more concrete recommendation on building bridges for cooperation, it was a very swift follow-up by the Council, where the French presidency took these files and actually had them adopted by all education ministers already in April. So that shows there's a strong commitment from the political level, from all member states. So there is now some expectation that there should be some action, and we are certainly from the Commission side, that's our role to keep on monitoring and following up and asking and keep on hearing from member states now, what are your implementation plans, what have you done already, what will you do, and then try to bring all this together, and hopefully we will see some action. Actually, we see already some changes. I think that's really a positive step. We cannot perhaps imagine a big revolution of all the changes, but as always, in the way cooperation has been built up in higher education, we take steps, and by each step we come further, and I think that's important. Now on the policy challenges, one can bring it down to a more concrete perspective, and you also mentioned that many of these specifics, because even if we have a dream of big things like building a European degree, take that as an example, we know that cannot be done in a day, but we can take small steps, and to take those small steps, we need to look at what have we really done in terms of implementing all those key commitments under Bologna. Have we really done as much as should be done in recognition, in quality assurance, on the credit transfers? I mean, everything that we have been built up and are there, the European approaches, etc. Maybe we have to be honest with ourselves that there has not been as quick and substantial progress in all of these key commitments. And that's where, of course, we have challenges still, or policy challenges to be able to progress. Now on related to that, and that is something that has come up more and more important because of the in-depth cooperation of university alliances, it's the sharing of resources. And that is perhaps something a bit newer, sharing of human and financial resources across borders. And there we are really touching upon some administrative and perhaps legal obstacles at national level. I think we have to dare to look into that. Something which has come up, I think, more recently, and that's, well, you mentioned the word governance, Michael, and I think that's an important one, that, of course, if we want all these policy challenges to be surmounted somehow, we need to look in the new governance models, and we see some innovative ones in the European University Alliances. But now the devil is in the detail. I mean, who is involved? Yes, the students absolutely need to be involved, but it's also are all the university and the comprehensive way involved? Are all the students, all the staff, all the faculties? Is the governance really comprehensive? So I think these are questions that alliances and certainly from the Commission we are looking at when monitoring. And perhaps also linked to that, what happens when those who were there in the beginning of the initiative? We have 3 years now of the first round. Now we've been able to roll out, and the first cohort indeed has happened, where we are expecting the second one now. But if there are many changes in everything from those who were involved from the start, the student or the leadership at university, we have to find a way also to keep up that momentum. I think that is something, an additional policy challenge we should not forget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, of course, please, come in.
Sophia can say this, but ultimately, if the next iteration of EU treaties does not deliver some competence in higher education and research to the European institutions, our children are going to be working for Chinese companies, and they're going to be singing American songs. It's as simple as that.
Yes, please, Matteo,
But
the student perspective on that right away.
But then, if we go down that path, it's also important to create the right, because if we talk about shared competence, that means also, for instance, building the capacity of the Parliament in order to be up to to have that shared competence. Because shared competence means also the possibility not only of the councils but also the Parliament in working on that. It means also delivering in the stakeholder consultation, because at the European level, we have as a benchmark the Bologna Process, like the fact that we as consultative members, UA, ESU, but also the other consultative members are now part of the drafting committee, for instance, of the ministerial declaration of the Bologna Process, or the ministerial declaration as a consultative members is basically, I would say, a benchmark also in how to involve. And at the EU level, we are not there yet. So if we're going to talk about, I think that in any case there is going to be an increase in at least de facto competency, and I think also the Council is aware of that, including the Swedish presidency, through the funding, for example, and through the link to the resilience facility. But if we want to have an open and honest conversation about that, which I think it's important, then also the other elements need to be there, including, for instance, the discussion about the social dimension of the transnational cooperation of the European education area, which is still very much, let's say, in the air. Also because it's one of the core elements for what regards, for instance, tuition fees and admission, but it's crucial, and we want, for instance, an upward convergence of student rights based on the benchmark in the different dimensions for where basically each country fares better. The others should strive to do that, to arrive at that. But in order to do that, basically, you need also to have the commitments of the different levels.
Thank you very much. Well, Kathleen, coming back to the institutional level, how do you think we can address the challenges you mentioned very concretely, whether you need something from the policy level, or also what can you do actually at the institutional level about this before we go into the real, treaty changes and all these discussions we may have further on?
Well, I think a lot of what I would have to say about this has already been sort of brought up over here. I think there's this question of, if we're talking about the European University Alliances, well, obviously we've seen that the instruments aren't in place. So even though we have the Bologna Process, not everything is aligned in the right way. We had the 2 calls last year for the European joint master's degrees, and also for the legal status of the alliances, that shows that we're asking for bottom-up contributions to try and make changes at the top. And I think it may be the right way to go, but it's a complicated way to do it. So the alliance is putting pressure on the member states, and maybe it will work because the member states do seem to have quite an interest in seeing these alliances succeed and do what they are designed to do. So we could see that continue. I also think, talking more generally, that something I mentioned before is I worry about the universities that aren't in the alliances, because they're being a little bit left out and left behind. And the alliances are sometimes seen as these models for research and cooperation, but they are not research alliances, and they are really based on academic cooperation. So there may be smaller universities or universities that aren't in these alliances that also have a lot to contribute and a lot of work to do. So I think we need to make sure that they're included, because I hate to see them left behind. Until we joined, as I said, we just joined an alliance 10 days ago. So it's very new for us. So we felt left out for a long, long time. And so we know what it's like, and it's really difficult. We had an alliance that we had created before that failed both times by 1 point, and we lost 4 of our members to the expansion, and so we were feeling a little bit left out in the cold, and so it's important to worry about those universities. And also, I think this gets back to what I was just saying, this idea of addressing the separation between research and academic programs. So when we think about deepening our transnational cooperation, we want not just a mobility scheme or a double diploma, for example. We also want to have the researchers involved with one another as well. And so, and we've also seen, I think, some lobbying from the European University Alliances for a research component to the funding for the alliances. And I think that's something we would like to see more of, is addressing this separation then also between research and academic programs, so that we can have instruments that allow us to do both at the same time.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, you also talked about a very important goal, actually, of the initiative to bring indeed more synergies between education and research. With that, I would like to open up the discussion. We don't have lots of time, but we have time for 2 questions from the floor before I give my speakers again back for a short closing statement. We have a microphone there in the audience. Are there any questions?
Sure, I'll ask one. Don't know if I should stand up or if this is fine.
It's fine. I think we can hear you well. Yeah.
Yeah. So as you were talking, not every university is going to be able to join an alliance. It's not. I'll just stand up since you're trying to look at me. Not every university will be able to take part of this, and I think it is a challenge that probably a lot of universities face, of how to make cooperation scalable. So not just one researcher that did a project with another in another university once, but making it more structured. And of course, the alliances will provide for this sort of strategic and ongoing cooperation, but not all universities will access this. So how can universities work towards that sort of scalable cooperation outside of the scope of the university alliances? If you have any thoughts on that.
Do you briefly say just your name?
Yes, my name is Anna Paiva. I'm a policy advisor for Coventry University in our Brussels hub here in Brussels.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's actually a very important question that I would like. Who would like to react? Matteo, I see you already.
Yes, very quickly. Absolutely, like the elements that of course, I don't have the answer, but I think that it opens up the discussion of what should be the future of the cooperation and the transnational, let's say, element beyond the alliances. I think that also now Sophia also indicated that there is much focus on that, but it is important that we still remember that, for instance, the Erasmus program is based on the development, or I would say even of a neural network, in the sense of the depth and the diversity of the engagement. While on the other hand, the alliances is very much trying to solidify, let's say, the cooperation between those specific higher education institutions that enter in that specific time. So I think that the important element to underline is, on the one hand, is that any elements that is given to the alliances is also available also to other structures, and on this, for instance, the legal status and European degree, at least as a purpose, have had that openness. But at the same time, we need also to have a discussion on what is the future of transnational cooperation within the European Union or in Europe as a whole, beyond the alliances.
We will actually come back to that in the second panel we will be having as well. Michael, you had a short reaction.
Partnerships have pre-existed for decades across Europe. and an awful lot of cooperation and partnership is taking place outside the alliances. The key value of the alliances, they are canaries in the coal mine. They're showing what the challenges are for all universities across Europe right now. And if we act on the learning from these alliances, address all these challenges that we have set out here effectively, not in 15 years' time, but in the next 3 years, then scaling up will be possible for everybody.
Sophia, a short.
Yeah, actually, I think you said basically what I wanted to say. I think it's important to remember the kind of staircase, that there are different levels and ambition of cooperation models. So it's not only one or nothing. And we have to build on that, and we see that there is also a progression of the staircase. You can start with one level, you get a, let's say, experience, and you want to go more in depth, and you move to the next step. I think that one has to see it rather than that and feeling not, I am not in the alliance, therefore I'm excluded. I think that gives also the wrong narrative of where we started. But we have to also recognize that being part of a European University Alliance is a huge investment. It is not, I'm just applying for a call and we cooperate as we tend to do. No, this is a huge investment which will require huge investment all the time, and it will require a change of mindset, a change of structures, a change of working, because that's the common objective we've set to ourselves. So it's also by being not part of it, one has to ask oneself these questions: do we want to go there? It might not be the solution, or where all more than 5,000 institutions around Europe want to go or should go, perhaps. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Now there's a big learning aspect on this. It's a huge learning process in the last 3 years. So of course, from the Commission's point of view, we hope it will not stay within the alliances. And that's our role as well, to project and help this learning to be also more available to others that may be inspired, and not only within Europe, by the way, it can go beyond Europe, this inspiration. And perhaps that will trigger also some networks that did not think of, do we want to go in this more structured and systemic direction, to actually do so. But this is a process, and I don't think we are there yet. We are starting with this sharing of this massive learning.
Thank you very much. Is there any last question? If not, I think we... yes, there is one.
Yes. Excuse me. My name is Albin Gaunt. I'm from Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. I was wondering about, now we're focusing a lot on the European arena and stage, but I was thinking about the global international cooperation, which is so important, not least now in the geopolitical times that we're living in, and in the backdrop of COVID, etc. So how can we sustain the global international cooperation while also cooperating closely on the European level? Preferably doing both at the same time. How can we do this? And what are the openings of the instruments of the EU to do that?
Thank you very much for your question. This is actually something we will also touch on in the second panel with the international outlook. I would just give Kathleen the possibility to answer that very briefly, because she didn't have the chance in the last round, and then we have to close, but we take it then further afterwards.
So we're continuing our other cooperations as well, though we've joined a European University Alliance, of course. That's the advantage also of our size. We're a big university, so we can afford to spread ourselves a little bit thinner than some smaller universities. I know Karolinska only has about 6,000 students. But I think one of the issues, of course, is the funding instruments. So that's the advantage of Europe, of course, are all of the different funding instruments, some of which can include partners from outside of Europe. So you can always look into that. But a lot of our funding that we do with our partners outside of Europe is from some of our own inside funding. So we have a French national label of excellence that provides us with a little bit of extra funding, and we're able to use some of that funding to put together projects with partners from outside Europe. So we're able to maintain it, but it's true that if you're in an alliance and you're a smaller school, and I've heard other smaller universities express the same idea, how do we balance being in the alliance and the commitment that it takes that Sophia mentioned, with also trying to maintain some of our other partnerships. So it's true that it's difficult. I don't have a super solution to that, but it's true you have to really pick and choose what's best and for you and your researchers, and then see what the funding is available.
Thank you very much for that. With that, we have to come to a close for our first panel, and I would like to ask the speakers to just tell me in one sentence, really, you have a challenge there. What do you think is crucial for transnational collaboration in the future? And we give this actually back then to the next panel as our message to them when they discuss further of the future prospects. Sophia, please.
Well, I think a lot of things actually have been said there, so I can only we should repeat for ourselves the sentences. I think coming back to what I said in my first reply on the bottom-up and the diverse perspective, I think this is my message, that we have to keep an open mind, an open vision for the future, and not enter into, let's say, the top-down thinking, and I'm saying that also from the Commission side, because I think that has been the success from the start of the initiative. So the keeping on imagining and dreaming, that's what we did in the beginning of the initiative, dreaming of where we want to go together, but then doing it in our own way. I think that's really the strong part of the initiative, and not forgetting, by doing that, the bottom-up means involvement. And I'm really saying that I think part of the success of the alliance is that, although Matteo will say we could have done much better, but comparatively to other initiatives, I think the alliances have been great in involving not only leadership and staff, but also students. So.
It was a little more than one sentence, but thank you very much nevertheless. Michael?
Apart from funding and other resources, convergence of national regulatory frameworks. If we have that, we can have distributed excellence, we can have networked Europe, which will be a partner with India, China, and the United States and other parts successfully in the years ahead.
Matteo, one sentence from the students.
The issue of the values. We have problems with academic freedom also in Europe, but this becomes even more important when we have the global cooperation. So the issue of foreign interference and how to be as open as possible, but also as close as necessary. We have had several also scandals in with regards, for instance, China, and etc. And I hope that this will also be tackled in the next panel.
Kathleen?
Okay, so very quickly. So I think I'm very positive. I think that we'll see cooperation ongoing, because now it's become an essential part of university governance. It's not just the cherry on top. I'd say what we'd like to see going forward with respect to European policy and instruments maybe is flexibility. So in the funding instruments I mentioned before, being able to combine research, academic programs, socioeconomic, private sector. So that's something we'd love to see going forward.
Thank you very much for this. I was actually alluding at the beginning to the quantum leap metaphor, and I was planning to say it's maybe not really the quantum leap, but when I hear all these differences, it is all the potential is actually there. We now need to see in the future how we can really release it. It might not be a leap from one point to the other, but a longer-term transformation that needs actually a lot of good enabling framework conditions as well. And with that, I hand over to Amanda for the next video, I believe. Thank you. And you